We will go ahead and call this Budget Committee meeting to order. Before we start, I wanted to let everyone know that apparently Metro TV is up above there filming, and so if we hear rapping on the windows, that means they couldn't hear you. So please grab your microphone, speak more clearly. Say it again, just FYI in case we hear knocking.
Hi guys.
Yeah, so, hi everybody. So tonight we have a couple pieces to our agenda. The first is to give a brief update on our FIT team's progress. And before we get to that, I want to thank the members of this group who are taking on the additional work of participating on the FIT team. And that is Counselor Brown, Counselor Evans, Chelsea, Ken, and Marty. So thank you very much for your time in helping us with that process. So we're going to have an update on the FIT and also talk about the community meetings that are starting tomorrow evening so that everyone feels pretty prepared for what's coming. Then we're going to move into, based on the feedback that I had from previous meetings, we're going to try to balance tonight some of our policy discussions, which we know we want to continue in part of that goal of reaching common understanding, and balance that with starting to look at some actual numbers and how we're going to move forward. So we're going to do some of each tonight. So John will review the FY budget, the recommendations from the fiscal year 14 process for budget reductions, and then also go over the longer list that I know some people have requested and the decision matrix so that we all are familiar again with what was the decision process last time around? What were the things we didn't really have time to understand about what was not on the list last time, so that we're ready as we start moving forward down that road. And then finally, we'll have a policy discussion around asset maintenance, which seemed pertinent given that there are some upcoming conversations about capital projects. So that's our agenda for the evening, and so we'll go ahead and I think get started. Mia, do you want to give an update on or give some information about the community meetings, and then we'll have Christy talk about the FIT team?
Sure, this will be brief. I hope that today you received the final schedule for which meetings all of you have agreed to attend and help facilitate, and that's also in front of you. And I just ask that if you have any changes, last minute or otherwise, if you could just drop me an email, that would be great, and we'll make arrangements for either someone else to attend or otherwise. There will be a group of staff at each of these meetings to help facilitate the meetings. And I would like to introduce you really quickly to Michael Kinnison. Michael manages neighborhoods and equity and human rights, and he's helped put a lot of the materials together and the meeting format in place so that you'll have successful community workshops. He'll also be the person that you check in with when you come to the meetings each night. So, the other document in front of you are guidelines for facilitators, and we're not going to walk through that right now because, as you'll see at the top, we're asking that you arrive at 5:30 each night before the 6 o'clock meeting that you're signed up for, and we'll provide you an orientation and you can get to know the staff person that you'll be working with for the evening. And with that, that's all I have tonight, unless there are any questions.
No, my final comment about the community meetings, and this will be challenging for all of us, but is there will be rabbit trails that community members want to go down. And so at each meeting we plan to have, and the staff member will talk about this more, but we plan to have kind of a parking lot place where there is a place where we can put other issues that people are still concerned about, or where there's continued energy, but we don't have time to actually solve that issue that evening. And then we will figure out a way that we go back and reply or send people some information about how they can continue that conversation. So we're just going to ask everybody's help, and we have a certain amount of time at these meetings. We really want to make sure that we have a chance to educate and also to hear from people specifically about some questions we'll be asking. So thank you. Great, thanks, Mia. So I think Christy's going to come. Christy's been the executive team member who has been facilitating the FIT team.
Hi, and just a quick update on the work that we've been doing. So as you remember, the Budget Committee brainstormed a list of topics for the financial investigative team to go through and to evaluate using their matrix criteria. We've gone through about 19 of those items on the list and have 2 meetings left. The team is doing excellent work. The 2 meetings that are left will be held in Harris Hall, which will be great because they are open to the public, and will be held from 5:30 to 8:30 on the 17th, and then from 5:30 to 8 o'clock on the 22nd of October. I do believe that the matrix that the team has been working on will be an excellent resource to the Budget Committee as we kind of wrap up the work that's being done, and that will come back to you, I believe, on the 28th of October. So,
Any questions or any additional comments from the members of the Budget Committee who have been participating in that process? Would like to share? Okay. Well, thank you all again for your time working on that. I think it will be a very valuable tool. Yes, ma'am.
If one of you people who run the FIT team would be willing to talk about how you think it's going from your perspective, I would really like to hear just a little bit about it. Because this is something new that we're trying.
It is something new that we're trying, yeah.
Right now?
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, we have time, so if you have some thoughts, it'd be great.
Sure. As with any meeting, it's taking a little while to kind of get our charter and move forward, but I think we're on firm ground now. I think if I could speak to the group, I'm sensing some difficulty in not being able really to make recommendations, but I think we're sort of efficiently doing the job we were assigned, which is to sort of evaluate the possible savings and timing of these. I would also say that it's a little difficult because, it's a fluid process, but there are some things that are clearly not going to work for the fiscal year 15 budget, but would be good, or possibly good ideas or approaches over the long term. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little difficult as well. But, I think in terms of our charter, we're fulfilling it and making good progress.
Yeah.
I think, I guess I'd echo that. I think we've been doing, at the end of the day, we've been doing a good job in terms of the matrix as we go through each item in terms of evaluating, kind of what it is and whether it might be available for the FY15 budget and whether it's legal and how it might impact other services and so on. Having said that, and kind of again echoing Marty, what it has been hard for people, and there's just a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest, some passion, there's energy, and it's hard at times not to have an opinion. So that's really what it kind of boils down to, is really just being sure you're kind of conscious about the fact that the opinions, we're going to talk about it in the Budget Committee, or the Council's going to talk about it. So, but I think, it's got there's a good cross-section of the community in there, and so I think it's been a good process.
Yeah. Did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, just based on that, thanks both of you for that feedback and having, been a Budget Committee member and kind of understanding some of the limitations. Just wanting to say that there'll be plenty of room for opinionating as we go forward,
Yes.
and I would encourage anyone who's part of that committee who feels constrained within the committee process to remember that we will be looking for input and opinions and guidance in other contexts. And so please don't feel like that all has to be smothered below some, framework that we've created for the FIT team. It's appropriate to maybe constrain there, but to take those ideas and opinions that are generated by looking at all this information and bringing it to the council, through public comment, through email, through whatever format seems right. I want to hear those opinions.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. It's an important comment. Councilor Brown.
Yeah, I'd echo what Ken and Marty said. It is a little frustrating, because, we can't expand with the analysis and opinions other than what the matrix, just fill it out, but can we do it for FY? Can we do it for next year? And, how much money could it possibly save, and all these things. And some of
I
these
think you have to be a little louder. They just noticed.
Some of these things are policy decisions, of course, from council and with input from the Budget Committee. All that being said, I think that I'm hoping that it will be useful in future conversations. I'm glad that it's happening early in the process. That's good, because we'll have plenty of time to discuss everything, I hope. My only possible regret would be that we didn't get this work finished before the community workshops that are being held. So we won't be able to, fully present that to members of the public that show up at the high schools for the community meetings. That's a possible flaw, but so that they could give their input based on what we've discussed. That being said, and we can at least, I suppose we can inform them of what we've gone through up to now, though, but that will be with the budget committee especially. So
Well, and I think
I don't know how that'll work.
Yeah, and I think the plan as it stands right now is for that team's information to come back to the whole budget committee, to be shared in summary form, and then for us to share that with the public and make that available as part of their opportunity to have comment as we go into the public comment season. So, yes, very important.
Well, that's good, but it won't be ready for the meetings. It would be my only regret there.
Christy, did you want to add something? And then I got it.
Oh, did you have something? Oh. I just wanted to say, I think the team is, as I mentioned, there's 31 items that these folks are going through, and every single meeting, you're getting a lot of information. The whole team is getting a lot of information presented to them in a very concise format, and I think they're really doing a fabulous job. It's a lot, and I really do appreciate the comments that were made tonight, because I do know it is a big challenge that they have in trying to complete the work in the time allotted, but they do ask outstanding questions, and we provide as much time as we possibly can to get as many of the questions answered in the room, and we'll continue to make ourselves available outside of the room for one-on-one meetings as needed. So,
Thank you. Bob?
I guess my question was, did I miss the email? Was there an email or notification sent out to the Budget Committee as to those people who had been appointed onto the FIT team?
So I think so.
Because I didn't get one. Do we have people that have been appointed to the revenue team?
We have not started the revenue team yet, no. And
I was just surprised to learn that we had a FIT team, because I didn't get an email saying that one had been put together and that meetings were being held and that they weren't public meetings. So that all kind of took me by surprise, but I was out sick most of last week and I didn't get all of the communications, so I'm just curious as to why a broadcast email hadn't gone out to the group.
So I think we did communicate about, and I'll get you Councilor Evans next, thanks, about the FIT team and ask for people who were interested in serving. Mm-hmm. We'll do the same thing for the revenue team when that work starts. And I can't speak to the public meeting piece, but I believe the staff has made some adjustments to make that public going forward. So.
yes, the next two meetings will be open to the public.
Councilor Evans.
I just was going to say ditto, Madam Chair, because, I think we were recruited, not drafted in this process. So it was whoever wanted to, participate and get involved at that level is kind of what it was.
Yeah.
At least from this committee. I know that there were some other people that were there who are not on the Budget Committee. Who
Citizens,
are part of
right,
that. Just,
yes.
So.
That's correct. Thank you. Any other comments, questions about progress on that? Okay, great. Well, thank you again. Thanks, Christy, for the update. So the next piece of our agenda is actually to move into a review of the FY14 proposed budget reductions, the decision matrix, the list of proposals from the city manager last go-around, as well as a longer list of things that were considered and rejected. So I'm going to turn the floor over to John for that.
Thanks, Laura. There was quite a bit of conversation at one time as to why certain items were chosen and what was the criteria we used on a city staff to present that, what eventually became that list of $5.3 million items. And so, as part of the conversation for the Budget Committee to start getting into more of the details of potential strategies, we wanted to just spend a few minutes letting you know in a little bit more detail on the criteria and our thought process on getting there, and that's what we're wanting to provide today. So what you have in front of you are two different, there's one sheet, front and back. The first sheet is FY14 proposed service reductions criteria. And so if you were to take a look at that, do we have a slide of that somewhere? just for, in case the audience might want to look at that as well. Oh, I have it. I'm sorry. The answer is yes. The answer is...
Maybe.
Perfect.
Theoretically, yes.
Yes. So you also have it in front of you as well as up there. And this is what we looked at as a executive team and organization as we started to step through this part of the conversation last year. These aren't in any particular order, but we looked at whether or not the services that remained were represented a balance of what the council said that they wanted as goals. And we talked about the goals a couple meetings ago, and those are sustainable development and safe community and those kinds of things. We took a look at whether or not it was a reduction rather than an elimination of a program. We take also a look at could they realistically be provided by others? Not necessarily would they be provided to the same capability or capacity, but were there others in the community that we felt could provide the service if they had the capacity? Could they also be efficiently restored if funding becomes available? I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the specifics. And so when we think about that, in some cases, it's efficiency doesn't mean immediate. And so it will, as I'll explain, some of them maybe it would take a year to bring it back, but mostly you haven't eliminated the infrastructure supporting that service, and so you can kind of bring it back. And then there were a couple things we did not include. So if they paid for themselves, self-funded, those weren't included because we could make reductions in those, but they wouldn't create any dollars to help close the gap. And then there are some things that we do that really aren't practical for others to provide, at least anywhere within the realm that we do. And adaptive recreation is one of those. We do a lot for that. And it's very difficult for somebody else to provide those kinds of services. So in those instances, we chose not to. With that said, in all the programs we did look at and will continue to look at, are there ways to be more efficient in any of them as far as whether or not they would go on this list as an item was not, or were not on there. And so here's that list. I'm going to walk through it, not in infinite detail, but then just as a way to start your discussion or start a discussion. The matrix on the top are the ones that were actually in our proposal. The ones on the bottom were that extended list that we've talked about before. And so the X's represent that what we felt is that they met that criteria. And so if we take a look at the first one around that second fire company and crew at Station 2, what we said is that reducing or eliminating, it's reducing a service, and we all know that, but we're not eliminating fire service, and so there's a reduction, not an elimination. Could it be provided by others? No, realistically it can't. Could it be efficiently restored? And this is one of those cases where it would take probably a year to bring it back because we would have to now recruit another 9 to 12 positions, 9 positions I guess it is, have them go through the training process, but we wouldn't have gotten rid of the facility, it would still be there. We wouldn't have gotten rid of the equipment, it would still be there. But so it could be restored because it's a package. Maintains balance of council goals. In our perspective, it's, even though it eliminates part of the public safety or safe community piece, by virtue of reducing rather than eliminating, we're still trying to balance all of those goals. Does it significantly contribute to filling the gap? And that was another one of our criteria. It's a $5.3 million gap that we were looking for, and so they had to be relatively large quantities of dollars in this case. And for us, that break point was right around plus or minus $100,000. $100,000 is a lot of money, but it's also in comparison to the total. So that would produce $700,000. And so you can take a look at that as we go through this matrix, how we would get to some of those. So the first 3 are all pretty similar. When we take a look at the teen court program, it's actually eliminating the teen court. That's not a reduction. So that's a little bit different in that perspective. Could it be provided by others? Yes, there are the mediation service. there's another word as part of that service that's in town. They could provide and have talked about providing a piece of that, so others could provide it. Could it be efficiently restored? We could bring it back. Again, it would take some time, but it could be brought back at kind of its own piece. It has a lot to do with the safety and equity portion of some of our goals. Does it contribute to the gap? This is one that's kind of right on that cusp of $100,000, so that would be one why that made that particular list. When we're talking about HSC funding, social service funding, at least at this part of the matrix, we are reducing rather than eliminating across the board. You might remember that there was a significant amount of dollars, but it wasn't the entire amount of dollars. Can be provided by others, and this is a good example where the capacity in the total system in the community isn't necessarily there, but what we're doing is we're passing dollars on to other agencies for the most part, and so agencies are providing the money. Could it be efficiently restored? In this case, very quickly. If there are more dollars, those could be distributed very easily. Maintain balance of goals. Again, from our perspective, we're still maintaining those 5 balance, even though a particular piece would be eliminated, and it would significantly contribute towards filling the gap. The branch libraries is one that's in this case, you could call it either reduction or elimination. You're reducing library services, but you're eliminating specific services in neighborhoods. So we thought more of it as elimination than a reduction. Provided by others, pretty difficult to do. Restored efficiently, not so much, because if you no longer have leases, now you're having to actually find facilities to do that. But it does contribute significantly to the gap. So you can kind of work through all of those, and be happy to answer questions on any of those as we go in your discussion. The next matrix are those that were on the extended list, but that we did not put into 5.3. In most cases, not all, but in most cases, it did not significantly contribute to filling the gap. And so, more specifically, if you eliminate the mental health court, it would save $50,000. So that's primarily why that's not on there. Now, there's some other reasons around that particular court, but that's a significant reason. Sign with LCOG dues, council travel in sister cities is $34,000. When you get to jail beds, that is a significant reduction that we've been funding, but I guess from our perspective, it makes a significant, if we were to eliminate that funding, it would make a significant dent into sort of that safe community portion of the goals. We all know that we're underfunded in jail beds anyhow, even with the most recent levy. This would just exacerbate an already difficult situation and have a significant impact. So primarily for that, that's not on there. The hazmat team, we're eliminating rather than reducing, which is the primary reason why we didn't recommend that, although it does capture a couple $100,000. But what that would mean is a pretty significant travel time for somebody to come from a metro area like Portland if we needed that, and so that would be a difficult place to be. Echo Hollow Pool, as compared to Sheldon Pool up top, it's a social equity issue for us and an accessibility. That access issue for us with the people that use Echo Hollow Pool is a little bit different demographic than Sheldon Pool, and so we felt that it didn't maintain the accessibility for all goal for the council when we were comparing it to Sheldon Pool. The rest of it's pretty similar. We can kind of look through all of these. Again, when you get down into several of these, the amount of dollars was not significant. The car camping contract, $81,000, didn't make the $100,000 mark, but it's also one in which, at least from a council goal priority, felt like it would be a pretty significant dent in maintaining that balance. Eliminating equity, human rights in neighborhoods, and sustainability, eliminating HSE funding, while that's significant dollar amounts, doing either one of those eliminates a whole swath of things as opposed to reducing them. And so that was a primary consideration for us, and then that necessarily means we're really not balancing some of the council goals. So eliminating either one of those was not, for us, one that we put on the list. So that just kind of gives a little reasoning on how we came up to it. Others may fill it in or have different criteria, but that's what we took a look at as we made our evaluation. So.
Thank you for that refresher and explanation. Now we'd like to just open it up, give people a chance to ask questions about what you just heard in terms of the decision matrix, and or have a discussion about what you see on here. So I have Councilor Clark in the queue at this point.
Thank you very much. Hey, I would like to just say, my understanding from input we've had from the public previously was that the number of people that use Sheldon Pool annually versus the number of people that use Echo Hollow Pool is significantly different. Can you help me remember what those numbers are, or is there a staff person here that can tell me that?
Renee might be able to fill in some of the gaps on that.
The attendance numbers actually are pretty close to each other for both pools, Echo Hollow and Sheldon. Might be slightly higher at Sheldon Pool. But really the decision we used was around who's being served by the pools, and if we were making a bad decision on either one of them, which...
Could you be more specific about that? I didn't understand what you meant, what John meant.
The social equity?
Yeah.
Echo Hollow Pools is in a Promise neighborhood. It's one of the lowest income neighborhoods that we have in the city, next to Fairfield Elementary, Malabon, Cascade Middle School, and Bethel School District. Serves a number of kids that wouldn't be able to, or don't have access typically to, affordable recreation services. And so that was one of the considerations we used.
Did we measure the attendees and where they come from, rather than assume that they were from the local area or that ward area?
We have done that in the past. We didn't do that necessarily in this situation.
The only reason I say that is because I remember the testimony that we heard from so many people who use Sheldon Pool during the course of the last session, and them coming from all parts of the city. So I was just, if we didn't measure at all where the users are coming from, that would be an important part of the decision making. Another piece for me is that we talk about all of this stuff as and list all of the things on the matrix in terms of services, and that's fine, but I notice that what we don't evaluate is work that the city does that we could do without doing in the eyes of some. For example, there's a good deal of regulatory work that gets done in planning and development that I would imagine we aren't constitutionally or state statutorily bound to do, but that we choose to do in Eugene, that many could live without. We aren't assessing the value of living with less regulation in some of those ways and what we could save in the process. And I wonder, is there a mechanism by which we could evaluate that?
My guess is there is some sort of mechanism. I don't know one of right off the bat. So, but with respect to regulations, if we chose to regulate less, it may or may not translate into direct savings of staff, which is, I think, what you're saying. If we didn't
planning and development,
as an example, the council just recently passed changes to ordinances, to the downtown ordinances, which actually removed some regulations and changed some things. That doesn't translate into, we can now have two less people reviewing plans. What we have done, and there may be somebody would say, on plan review, we often staff to the place of not to a certain level, then as additional plans come in, oftentimes we've contracted some of those out. And so just by virtue of reducing some regulation, you're not necessarily reducing the requirements for staff unless you go significantly less. So if an analogy that isn't the same, if we didn't have any traffic codes, we can eliminate all of our traffic officers. So if we eliminated a significant portion of our plan review requirements, we probably could get a little bit fewer.
And I know, I'm not trying to be odd about
No, I
it
know,
or hyperbolic. I'm just saying that we actually don't have any mechanism by which we can say stuff that we choose to do at a local level that's not state required, you know, the potential for duplication isn't being evaluated in this process that I really wish we were.
That's true. It isn't being evaluated in this process, is I think what you're suggesting.
And I'm trying to ask, can we?
My guess is we can, but with that said, I would also, the process for changing ordinances around many of these things is a significant time producer in and of itself. And so in the short run, we'd probably actually need more capacity in order to do all of that evaluation and public process that goes with that at the end of the day to make a change in a regulation that may reduce eventually the amount of staff time required. So I don't see that as an immediate, near-term kind of a fix.
I've run out of time, but I guess I didn't hear the answer to, is there no way to evaluate that?
My guess is there is some sort of evaluation that we can do. I don't know what that is right off the bat.
Okay. I'd like to know.
Thank you. Ken, you're next.
I answered my question. I'm fine.
Okay. Marty.
I realize this is sort of beyond the scope of the question you were asked. I feel confident that you, given the task you were assigned, to that. But one of the things when I supported, at least personally, one of the reasons I supported delaying the cuts by funding from one-time sources for a year was to give some time for sort of creative solutions to mitigate the damage. Things like, yeah, we don't want to cut the hazmat team, but we already require companies that handle hazardous materials to pay for the right to know program through a fee. So could we require them to pay an additional fee to fund the hazmat team? Exploring the possibility of a nonprofit operating Sheldon Pool is another one. Operating Laurelwood, not selling it, but operating it as a park versus a golf course. I guess, is that going on right now? Are those? I just want to make sure we're not preventing creative solutions by saying, "Well, here's your task."
We're always trying to find new solutions. I guess it's a little bit in the I guess what I would say is if there are solutions that people have ideas for, we'd be happy to take a look at some of those. Some of those would require a significant amount of work, so we would want to ensure that people are comfortable with that. Some things we may have already explored, and that would be something we could come back with. So the question we're being asked doesn't constrain us. I think what we've said is, given the place where we are financially, given the gap and where we've been over the last 5 years, as we've taken a look at what are the next places to probably reasonably go in the near term, this is where we've landed. And if there's other ways to get there, we're always open for those.
Claire. Yeah, I don't have a bunch of questions. I appreciate the walkthrough. I think that's very valuable, and I could quibble with, how things have been categorized or not. But one specific question I had, and I'm not picking on anything in particular, it just kind of came up, you have classified the second Cahoots van as not being able to be provided by others, but a huge chunk of change going to Human Services Commission could be provided by others, and I was just curious in terms if you had any background to offer on why you would decide that the second Cahoot van couldn't be brought in-house by Whitebird and operated or supplied by another means.
I suppose it probably could. I think what we were looking at is that there isn't anybody else currently providing that type of service, and so that became the criteria, as opposed to if it's a new service that somebody's willing to provide, yes, they could do that.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
So I put myself in the queue next, and I just had a couple clarifying questions from this. First of all, under Echo Hollow Pool, it says it could be provided by others, and under Sheldon Pool, that says it could not be provided by others, and I just wanted to understand the difference there.
There probably isn't a difference there. I think what the one difference might be, and Renee, you can weigh in if it's a little bit nuanced, is, again, around the demographics, whether it's, not surveyed each of the people that showed up in order to get to here. The thinking is that the location of the Echo Hollow Pool and the demographics of that location probably precludes them from joining the Y as easily or the something else. And so it might be more difficult for them to have another option outside of the public pool. At Sheldon, it may be a little bit different, and so that would be, I think, the nuance between those.
So it was less about the city's ability or some other ability to provide versus the ability of, or the believed ability
Right.
of citizens to access.
Right, so
swimming.
somebody else could provide that service, meaning they join the Y. Right.
Is that what you were going to add, Renee?
Sounds good. No. Actually, they should have really been the same, although, and you'll have a work session coming up
Okay.
around Bethel Park. We have had some conversations with the Y in Bethel Park around, but that is something that's far off and certainly isn't a solution for FY15 or anytime soon, so
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that.
possibly.
And then my other question was actually about, it looked like most of these things, one of the things we definitely looked at was significantly contributes to filling gap. And I just wanted to understand in terms of process that you went through. So some of these are $100,000 or less, certainly on the secondary list, but even there are a couple on the top list. Was there any process of sort of saying, well, if we want to eliminate $100,000, there's either a single $100,000 service, or there might be 10 $10,000 services, and was there a process of, without going down to things that cost tiny amounts of money perhaps, but was there a process by which you evaluated some of those smaller services that could be chunked together to make a bigger difference, or was that not part of the process?
An example, council travel plus sister cities is probably, they're unrelated. We just chunked those together, and that's at $34,000, and so that would be a good example of that. I don't know the dollar amounts between equity, human rights, neighborhoods, and sustainability, so I don't know if it's a relatively large amount of money, but I don't know the breakout on that, so that's all chunked together, although we treat them as sort of in that same group. If you take a look at Metro Partnership and Swan Dues, the Swan Dues is a South Willamette Angel Network. Those aren't, they're kind of related but not exactly related, and so there's one that is chunked together in that. I think what we did was take a look at some of the earlier criteria and then got around to how does it contribute to the gap, and so so that conversation is occurring in parallel. So are there other services and I think the other piece from our perspective is we provide a lot of other services, obviously, but in a lot of cases are variations on the theme. And so if you take a look at the fire department, for example, and take a look at what is it that we could reduce there, based on what the chief would say are no good options, because, as you remember, they've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last many years through overtime reductions, efficiency, eliminating positions. So if you want to capture dollars, it could be a fire company. You could have a rolling brownout, so that would be something, which is really worse. That's why you see things like the hazmat team. In a previous budget, we actually eliminated the urban search and rescue team, but that could be provided by somebody else locally, and so that was okay on that, and that collected dollars. So I don't know if there's a lot of small ones that you can get together. The recreation programs and services would be a compilation of a variety of those within those divisions, so it's not just one program. There's several of those that come together. Parks maintenance is probably that same way. It's not just one park that doesn't get maintained. You have a variety of several different services that all contribute to that $500,000 in parks.
Thank you. Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick things. I wanted to point out that on the elimination of Human Service Commission funding, the City of Eugene represents about 60% of Human Service Commission funding. When you take the federal dollars that are also matched with that, in talking with Steve Manella, that would represent as much as a 75% reduction in Human Service Commission funding. While it's true that would reduce, those could be provided by others, there are some nonprofit agencies who are dependent on Human Service Commission money, and if you take that much away from them, they will go out of business. So that service will no longer be provided. They will just go away. That's just an observation. So you can't kind of like take all that money away and not expect there to be an effect. The second point gets back to the notion of can we, as a matter of choice, reduce a regulatory role and see that as a way to reduce staffing because that work is no longer being done. I would have a hard time just saying let's do an evaluation of it because those regulatory roles came out of the City Council saying we choose to do this. So I think it would have to be a two-stage conversation. The first stage would be for the City Council to say, we as a City Council no longer want to do that. Then you could say, okay, then I will look at what it would take to reduce or eliminate enforcement of that. So you can't just go off and start saying, we could stop doing this because you don't know what we're going to tell you to stop doing until we've had the first conversation. So I think if we wanted to go down that road, we would have to start it with us saying we now choose to no longer do this as a council. Then you could go and do your work.
Right. I'd agree with that.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Thanks. I've got a couple questions. On the decision matrix, I'm looking under the first tier there, about the fifth thing down is reduce HSC and Looking Glass Station number 7. I forget how much Looking Glass is per year. Does anyone have that off the top of their head? Even a guesstimate?
Yeah, we'll look up for that. When we get it, we'll come back and...
I didn't bring my
Yeah, I don't recall
document,
what it is either.
But anyway, that was one question, and the second question is...
36,000.
Okay, thank you. And then on the other side of the page, it says services that pay for themselves are not included, such as athletics. And I'm just wondering what that refers to. Would that be the pools and the...
No, adult athletics, and Renee, you can answer in more detail. Actually, people sign up for their team, and when everybody signs up, it pays for all the expenses that go with that particular one.
To use the park playing fields, okay.
Right.
All right, thank you. And then I'm looking in the second tier of reductions where it says eliminate equity, human rights, neighborhoods, and sustainability, and I noticed that there's no check mark in the reduced rather than eliminated, and so the suggestion is that we would that they couldn't be reduced in any significant way, and they would just have to be eliminated, and
No, up in the top tier, it's just a reduce. The bottom tier is things that we did not move forward. In that particular case, we didn't think eliminating all of that met any of the criteria other than it was a significant dollar amount.
yeah, 1.1 million, yeah. But that was kind of eliminated from serious consideration because of...
Right, that didn't go forward.
Okay, okay, thank you. All right, that's enough for questions. I just have a brief comment about the, planning and development, about plan reviewers and site inspectors, and we probably need a couple more in each category. There's so much going on, so much building activity going on in Eugene that I know they're all running around scrambling, trying to keep up with their workload, and there may be other reductions that could be made in planning and development, but those two categories, I don't think we can safely reduce any of those. We probably need to add to them. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, so good point, George. In fact, I'd love us to see us do site review, which would add to that. But I was going to make one of the points I was going to make is the same as Chris's, is that the process to go by eliminating regulation is to go through the council and then the city manager can figure out if it saves anything. More likely not than it does, because we would probably just tweak things. But the other point I wanted to make was that we need to be careful about what Chris was talking about last meeting, which was the Jenga game, where you pull out a thing and there's these unintended consequences and the whole thing can come tumbling down. Not everything that we think is a creative idea actually ends up saving money. There are parks, for instance, are a good example. Parks actually cost us a heck of a lot of money to maintain. All of them do. The two examples that cost us less than every other park are Cuthbert and Laurelwood Golf Course. And Laurelwood Golf Course actually would cost us substantially more, probably multitudes more, to maintain that as a park than it would be as the very modest cost we actually pay to have it be a golf course, especially for the amount of people that use it both as a park and as a golf course. So we have to be careful about things that we ask for, because we might not necessarily want to hear what the answer is. Even though we think it might be a good cost-saving measure, it might actually end up costing us more.
Thank you. Any other, Councilor Clark is in round 2. Any other comments or questions? Mayor Pearson?
My only comment is, and I think this is down the road when you start looking at specific things, but that's when that whole idea of how do you ferret out the implications of the decision comes into play, and what kind of tools are you going to use?
Speak into the microphone.
Oh, sorry. And what kind of tools are you going to use to look at that? Because you could say that someone else could provide, I'm going to go back to the human services thing because we've been talking about it. You could say someone else can provide it, but if they don't, then what are the implications for what happens, and how much does that cost you in the long run? So you have to kind of find a way to walk out 2 or 3 circles around those things that you're thinking about reducing, so you really understand whether you're actually reducing something or creating more costs in other ways. And that will be difficult, but I think it's going to be an important part of the work that you have to do.
$1 Million Larry. $1 Million Larry.
$1 million Maury. The example that Alan is using is that the $1 Million Maury is a New York Times article, I think, or a Wall Street Journal article, where they tracked a homeless person for a year where he only received services in the jail and in the emergency room, and he ended up costing far, far more than if he actually had access to a place to live and some wraparound services. So those are the kinds of implications that we're talking about.
Thank you. Councilor Polling.
Yeah, this is in reference to Mike and Chris's conversation about the
You may want to pull it out.
non-mandated, how did you word that? The things that the city is doing.
Locally created.
Thank you. And then I agree with Chris, before, the decision is made to start looking at how to, eliminate these or reduce these, we have to have the discussion at the council about whether or not we want to continue doing them. But it would be nice to have a list of those things, because probably more than half the counselors don't even know which ones would be on that list. So I think if it's not too much trouble, if we could get a list of those things, that would be greatly appreciated.
We should probably think about that. That actually, I think, would take quite a bit of work. I mean, in the simplest form, here's the code book, but that doesn't help, right? And here's a code book and the building code, but I don't think that's what your intent is.
No.
And so it would take quite a bit of work, I think, to kind of go through at some level of detail that actually says, is it local? Is it created by ordinance? Is it created by policy? Is it created by practice? Is it created by state mandate or federal mandate? So it's not an easy kind of whip through that, I don't think.
Yeah, I realize it probably wouldn't be, but still, if we were to have that conversation, I think that list would be very important to have out before we had that conversation, so we knew what we were talking about.
Thank you. Councilor Taylor.
I think that's an interesting idea. I think, for example, the Budget Committee is mandated. We couldn't abolish that, right? And the Planning...
Darn.
Yes. The Planning Commission is mandated. Police Commission is not. Some of those things we know we don't have to have. And the things that we have added over the years, some of them we just decided to do them. And if we do start cutting, we might want to look at those things that we don't have to have. But I would like first to look at sources of revenue before we start cutting things. But and I think what you're talking about, things that other people can do, that's an important thing to look at also. Do we have to have people arresting people for sleeping, for example? It's not mandated. And I think we could all think of some things that we have that we don't have to have, and without having an exhaustive list. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Looking through the list, same list that we've been looking at for a long time, it always strikes me how many of the different services that my family has taken advantage of and participated in with the city. So I think it's very hard to go through these kind of lists, but I think that's part of our task is to do so. I know we've talked in the past about how we as a committee need to help the council maybe prioritize the services that we maintain, and that we may not be able to offer all the services that we currently do. And I look forward to those discussions. I probably really only have one question for you, John. Is the teen court program still active, or has that been cut?
That's fine.
It is still active.
Yes, it's still active.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other? Councilor Evans.
One of the things that I notice on these lists, and I'll just call out one example, is the Human Rights Commission. We provide regional service. We don't just provide municipal service. And there has to be some kind of way for some of the services that are on this list, like Human Rights Commission, to be able to, recoup some of our expenses there, because Lane County eliminated their Human Rights Commission. I don't believe Springfield ever had one. And basically what that does is those complaints land on our desk, and they stress our staff, and they tax us in ways that I don't think we fully have delineated in terms of the budget impacts that those have. And I think the same thing happens with the pools as well. We have a regional issue, and we're taking the bulk of this for the rest of the region. So I'd like to see a way for us to be able to address this again, like Bob says, and some other people, from a revenue standpoint. Is how do we recoup the revenue from people who are using our services but not paying for them in any significant way?
Thank you. Any other comments, questions before? Okay, Councilor.
Just-
Well, you're in the queue again, second. Sorry.
I was just going to comment on that.
We're in. You're
Yeah.
first round. Yeah, still in first round. Okay, Jill.
I guess would thank the city and the city manager and the staff for, thoughtfully going through these elements, which are really, really hard to cut. And it seems to me that they've taken the city council's goals and gone through and, bulked some of these things together and given us, as the budget committee, their very best, lowest impact cut. I mean, I really personally feel confident based on this, again, as Bob said, we've seen this now for 8 months. We've gone through it several times. And we've seen the second tier, and it seems to me that if the hard decision needs to be had, that these are thoughtful decisions to cause the lowest impact. And I concur completely with Councillor Taylor when it's about, trying to take more of a glass half full approach here. What are our revenue sources? I mean, rather than making the most exhaustive list that known to humankind about other cuts that could be made in, even $10,000 increments, it seems to me that some discussion should be had about revenue. And then at that point, once we've exhausted the revenue that we could bring in, also, as Councilor Evans has mentioned, picking up the cash that we're letting just drop on the floor and not collecting from other people, then at that point, I guess, trust our city manager and our city staff. And, that doesn't say without questioning and but having some element and not asking them over and over again, you think this is the best, and they keep bringing it back to us and saying it's the best, right? So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other first round comments or questions, we'll go ahead and a quick second round. So I have Councillor Clark and then Councillor Zelenka.
Thank you, Chris. I agree with you entirely that the council ought to drive some of that, but as George mentioned, it's too voluminous for staff not to help start us somewhere with that conversation. My point was that we're not even asking, can we talk about it? We don't have any process for evaluating that. And I'm just going to use a hypothetical, but let's say, and I don't believe it does, but let's just say that one of the things we've done in the last, pick a number, 3 years, that's new would be that we now insist that grocery stores charge 5 cents for a paper bag, okay? Let's say that has a particular, hypothetically, if that had a particular staff person hired to enforce that, that's something we've passed reasonably, and I think that the resounding rejection that the public gave to the potential city fee, part of that was because they're saying, hey, you're doing a lot of stuff, but some of it we don't need, and it felt a little false and inauthentic to say, well, the only choice we have is to cut swimming pools and to cut library hours and to cut things that are very genuinely dear to people, as opposed to things that may be less dear, like enforcement of some regulations that maybe we've thought of in the last few years that aren't critical. And I would suggest then one of the ways we might start is let's look at the things we've brought on brand new in the last 3 years and say, could we live without them? Another thing I would suggest is that we've brought on new positions in the last 3 years, and we should analyze whether or not we genuinely need those. 2 years ago, we spent $90-some thousand in total to bring on a climate and energy analyst. Is that more important than a fire station? I think these are the kind of, and the crew at the fire station, these are the kind of questions we need to ask, and also the alternatives to some regulation. I like LRAPA. If it went away, DEQ would take over. We're not asking those kind of questions, and we don't have a process for it, and that's my challenge. We should be doing that.
Thank you.
Just,
You want to add something?
could I just respond briefly? I do think the process you're going through, in my opinion, actually gets at that. So the question isn't whether or not we should have a sustainability manager. The question is what type of sustainability program do you want and what outcomes do you want around that? So in this case, if you were to eliminate sustainability, that position will go away. So it's not about the position, it's about the service. And I think you are talking about that, and I think that's part of what the Budget Committee is going to do, is talk about any or all of these kinds of things. The good news is actually the FIT is going to take a look at the enforcement of the bag ordinance, so that actually is on their list to take a look at. So, but I will suggest The one other piece on the criteria as a budget committee keeps moving through this is we'll be able to spend lots and lots of time saving $1,000. If the gap is $5 million, we also need to spend equal amount of time on things that could actually close a $5 million gap. So that would just be my other thought.
Thank you. So I have 2 more people in the queue, and I want to be 3 more people in the queue, and I want to be cognizant of our timing. We do also have an opportunity to talk about some asset maintenance policy issues. So I'm going to let these 3 go ahead, and then we're going to call it for tonight on that conversation. And we'll have an opportunity. Believe me, we'll have plenty of opportunity to come back and continue to talk about these. So go ahead, Councilor Zelenka.
Well, just to clarify, I don't believe there was any FTE added to enforce the bag ban, so don't let anybody get that in their head that that's something that would save us a bunch of money, because it doesn't exist. And, you know, we get back to this, what John was talking about. We could talk a lot about things that, one year we spent about 4.5 hours talking about $7,000, which was stupid. And I don't want to do that again. A $7,000 change in the budget. It was really not a good use of our time. And the consequences of having something go away means something else happens. Good example on the climate change stuff. You're going to see a report coming to the council pretty soon that talks about the actions taken in the Climate Action Plan, how much money in operating costs, the millions of dollars it will save the city over time to get to those goals and implement those goals are way outweigh the cost of the program and the FTEs. So, you know, those would almost assuredly be a heck of a lot less had we not had those people to be able to make those things happen. When Greg was talking about people using our stuff without paying for it, when Chris and I were on the original panel looking at the road funds, one of the startling things we found out was that half the people that use our roads don't live in the city of Eugene. That means that if we only pay for our roads through property taxes, only Eugene residents pay. The other 50% skate. And so there are ways to capture that, but they're complicated and they're difficult to implement. But they're doable. And that one in particular was one of the things we looked at in that committee and figured out ways to look at that, and it could actually come up with substantial amounts of money without impacting the citizens of Eugene. It would actually impact the other people who are not citizens of Eugene.
Thank you. Councilor Surratt.
So while I appreciate the idea of looking for other places for savings, I am disturbed by the idea of asking the council to go back and revisit decisions that it's made over the last couple of years. Where does that stop? We could go back 10, 15, 20 years and rewrite, you know, our whole set of ordinances. I don't necessarily think that is a constructive approach to the crisis in front of us. I know that we've eliminated vacancies, we've eliminated positions in a lot of departments, and I just think that it's a slippery slope to think we're going to go back and revisit, you know, council's decisions over the last 3 years to look for budget savings. I would not support that idea.
Thank you. So, Councilor Brown, I believe you were in the queue.
Yes, thank you. Well, yeah, I just have a comment and then I have a suggestion, and I'll be brief. Councilor Clark suggested that if we stopped funding El Rapa, the DEQ would take over. I don't think so. They're in Salem. They don't have an office here. And so if somebody notices a violation, you call the DEQ, maybe they'll drive down 2 or 3 weeks later and look around and see what the problem is. I don't think that idea would need a whole lot more fleshing out. In fact, so my suggestion is for Councilor Clark to prepare a list of areas where he thinks that the city overregulates, and perhaps could be, and share that with the budget committee. And rather than just say, staff, you go figure it all out, like, why not have a list of things and we could kind of look at those and vet them without spending a lot of staff time on that. Thank you.
Can I just clarify something? So my understanding earlier from Councilor Pryor's comment was that many of those things would actually go to council, not to budget committee first. For
Go to council.
Right? So the list would actually, just to be clear, if there was a list that was being prepared, it would be a list to go to council for discussion.
That's a very good idea. Let council look at them.
Okay, just wanted to
Budget committee is very busy, too.
Okay. So Councilor Pryor is the last person, and then we're going to cut off this discussion, and we'll go ahead into the next piece. Councilor Pryor.
The pressure's on. What is interesting, and I think what is constructive, is the notion that do we have an opportunity to look at streamlining city government? And I think it's a laudable thing. Is there a way that we could, in the course of doing this, find some ways to streamline in addition to cutting entire things out? One of the things I often hear from folks is that the city is bloated and bureaucratic, and you hear it all the time. Not that it's necessarily true, but it's a question, and it's a question that periodically is worthwhile looking at. Is there ways we could streamline? But streamlining is a vast continuum. You can streamline by just kind of sanding along the edges, or you can streamline by removing entire pieces. But in some cases, like the Jenga game, you remove an entire piece, you streamline it, but it doesn't work anymore. So you have to streamline very carefully. It doesn't mean you don't look at streamlining. Streamlining is something that we should look at, but I don't think that in the context of the 2015 budget, we could have a streamlining conversation that would remove entire pieces and really speed the thing up. Because I think that streamlining conversation would really involve what are some major areas that we could disentangle. And disentangle is, I think, the only word that occurs to me, because in some cases, I don't even think staff could readily tell you which parts are entirely Eugene, which parts are some mix, and which parts are mandated. And so I think actually a list, and it doesn't have to be just you, we could all come up with a list of areas that we would have questions around to say, is there an opportunity to streamline here, and not just make it any one person's responsibility to do that, but maybe there is an opportunity to streamline here if we do it very thoughtfully. Sure.
I would suggest maybe there'd be some value in having some work session time on this, because many of the regulations that we may be looking to streamline have no impact on the general fund because they're paid differently. And so if the outcome is around closing the general fund gap, that's different than if the outcome is for another purpose, which could be a lot of good purposes. And so maybe before everybody starts creating a variety of lists, maybe we'll want to at least have a little bit of a conversation around it. And so that might save us on the staff, and it might also provide some additional information as you go provide the list. So maybe we think about that. Maybe we can revisit that at a work session, see if the council wants, what you want to do with, if you want to have a work session on, or how you want to do that. So we can, I suggest maybe we talk about, or the council talks about that and see what they want to do with that.
Great, thank you very much. So we have a limited amount of time tonight because we are up against a city council meeting. So I know we have, I believe, Kurt Corey from Public Works, who's going to share just a little bit with us about asset maintenance and how that fits into a larger policy conversation. Maintenance against other service priorities.
Actually, one page of slides that accompany this, so
Great,
they will
thank
be
you.
very brief.
No three-legged stool.
It's efficient.
You don't know that yet.
I don't see it.
Is it there that advances it?
Be a three-legged stool here.
Okay, so we are going to take a few minutes and talk about the aspect of operation and maintenance, capital preservation of assets, and then you can have a discussion around how that fits in with other budget service priorities. So the first picture up here is actually a picture of our capital improvement plan document, which is the essentially the 6-year strategic plan for where capital assets and infrastructure come from in the city of Houston. The CIP identifies assets by category, and you can see on the handout a couple of these are highlighted in red for the purpose of distinguishing those as general fund assets primarily, and the others in black are primarily not general fund. They're taken care of through other dedicated funds. Third piece is pavement life cycle curve, and so start by saying that I think you're all aware that the road network is not a general fund asset, but the concept of capital preservation and maintenance as it relates to roads, I think, is really applicable to how we approach other asset preservation. So the council for sure has seen this curve many times over the years, and many of the budget committee have seen it, but in essence it describes a new pavement that we put down as having approximately a 20-year life. We don't need to do too much with that pavement for about 12 years, and during that period of time we expect its condition to deteriorate by about 20%. At that time we can spend $1 and bring it back to a like new condition. If we opt not to spend $1 at that time and wait just 5 more years, we lose another 40 to 50% of condition and essentially take it out of the category of being able to take care of it through normal maintenance activities, and we spend $4 or $5 short time later versus $1 when it would have done the most good. So how that relates to some of our other asset inventory. In the case of parks and open space assets, you might recall that Eugene's voters have passed 2 capital bond measures since 1998, one for $25.3 million in 1998, and the second one for $27.5 million in 2006. We're certainly grateful to the voters for their confidence, and we've subsequently increased the inventory of parks and open space assets dramatically, both in terms of passive recreation and natural resource preservation, as you see in this ridgeline photo, as well as active recreation and the neighborhood use and other amenities that have come through the acquisition of parcels for future neighborhood parks. In fact, the 2 measures have resulted in an impressive list of improvements, as you see here. On the other hand, the Parks and Open Space operating budget has yet to be reconciled for this expanded asset base over the years, and as we've reported to the council in recent years, we now have a park system renovation backlog that's the equivalent of deferred maintenance of about $23 million, and we are underfunding annual operation and maintenance by just about $2 million per year. A similar story is here on our public buildings and facilities. Here's one of the newest additions to the public building and facility inventory. The city's public buildings and facilities would cost an estimated $325 million to replace. Best management practice that you've heard from Mike Penwell on numerous occasions is that a reasonable investment would be about 2% of that replacement value per year for capital preservation. As you can see from this, the red bar indicates what would be invested based upon best management practice. The light blue indicates what's actually been budgeted in recent years. And you can see that that has been funded about $2 million short per year for a number of years. There's also a deferred maintenance backlog at the Sheldon and Echo Hollow pools. Despite the best efforts of the facility staff, the Sheldon pool has a deferred maintenance backlog today of about $1 million. Echo Hollow is about $2.5 million. So how does one go about the business of prioritizing asset maintenance, capital preservation against other service priorities? I didn't bring that answer with me tonight. It is purely a policy question, but I can tell you that there are some very real risks associated with a policy of deferred maintenance. Asset deterioration and impairment would simply mean that the assets are not functioning as efficiently or as cost effectively as they could. Asset failure would indicate that they just simply don't work anymore. It would need to be closed. Higher costs are a function that represent the phenomenon that it never gets cheaper to do work that should have been done when it was timely. It almost always costs more later. Rarely even stays the same. There are also health and safety implications, particularly when you think about playgrounds, when you think about pools, when you think about building systems. And then finally, to the extent that the community has made major investments in the infrastructure system, there's an implied agreement that we will preserve and maintain those investments once they're on the ground. Finally, deferred maintenance will logically result in a failing grade on any triple bottom line analysis when the expected result would be higher cost for service, less effective use of available resources, and ultimately less access to services across the service delivery system. So those are the brief comments I have. Be happy to take questions or open it to any conversation that you might have.
Thank you very much for that brief yet effective presentation. And so now we have about 15 minutes. This is definitely something we can come back to at another time, but I'd like to at least take the 15 minutes we have, open it up either for questions for Kurt or comments about the question before. So I have Marty in the queue first, and then Councilor Brown.
I guess I just want to distinguish between capital maintenance and capital improvement. I have at various times in this committee and in the FIT, we've also discussed choosing a strategy of, rather than saving for capital improvements and sort of paying as we go, going to the voters more often for voter-approved bonds as a way, basically, of new revenue to support these. I mean, frankly, since Measures 5 and 50, we have a certain amount of budget, and they want more and more, the voters want more and more services out of that budget, and so at some point you have to say, well, if you want something new, you have to get rid of something old, or you have to get new revenue. And so adopting that strategy, what I was doing, but I do want to distinguish between that general policy at looking improvements in the future versus what the gentleman's talking about maintenance, which I wholeheartedly support.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. This is more of a comment than anything else. It's a topic that seems to have dropped off council's radar screen in the last 4 years. It was a hot topic when I first got on council when we were discussing moving the police facility out of City Hall. And we had a lot of discussion about the seismic vulnerability of City Hall. And that is the most unsafe, seismically, publicly owned building in the town. The second most vulnerable, way below life safety standards also, is the Overpark garage. And people park there, and we rent out spaces for retail spaces down below. And so when we're talking about asset maintenance of public buildings, I'd like to see this come back into play sometime. I mean, I don't have any suggestions now, but it's real important, and it's a tremendous liability, I believe. We know the building's unsafe, and yet we encourage people to park there and rent the spaces, and so it really does need to be seismically upgraded. Thank you. It's just more of a comment.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you. As George mentioned here, I was ready for the three-legged stool that we often get to understand the differentiation there. I appreciate this. This is good information. I wonder, though, since we didn't go through it specifically here, a few years back we started out with $170-some million backlog in deferred road maintenance. We passed a couple of good bond measures and did a whole lot of work. I know that roads continue to deteriorate unless they're maintained differently, and so new ones come onto that list, and costs change. But can you tell me what deferred maintenance road balance would be today, roughly?
I can give you a pretty good guess, I think is what it's going to say, because we update the plan each year at the end of the construction season. At the end of last year's work, we were down in the range of $100 million. A lot of money, but just about half of what it used to be. I suspect when the report comes out after the first of the year, it will be at least moderately under $100 million.
Excellent. You do a fabulous job. I think you're a great guy. Don't take this as a critique. I've asked for a couple of years for something we still haven't talked about that I'm aware of, which is a comprehensive plan for how to deal with the underdeveloped street network in the community and the not built to a city standard. My recollection of that is that it's a $50-60 million backlog of cost to develop that. Can you tell me, is that still the same dollar-wise? And can we expect to have some kind of plan for how to bring all of our streets up to a city standard, because my guess is at some point in the future, we'll probably bring in more county roads, and I'm hoping we have a plan for how to deal with them when we do.
Yeah, I think, I'll answer that the 30-second view would be that typically the strategy would have been that unimproved streets would have been brought to an urban standard through a local improvement district process, LID process over time, and most recently the council opinion has been that LIDs are not found to be favorable. So the current strategy is to budget about $200,000 a year from the road fund and do what we call maintenance overlays, short-term 5 to 10-year fixes on some of these unimproved streets. And we've made significant amount of progress on that. I think the number associated with bringing those to an urban standard is probably still in that $90 million range.
I only have 20 seconds left, but I would say at some point in the future, some of the areas in North Eugene that are quite populated with roads that aren't to an urban standard will come into the city. And I think we need to have a plan developed for how we'll deal with that by the time we get there.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Kurt, so $100 million for roads, $90 million for unimproved roads. So the slide that you showed on public buildings shows about a $2 million gap this year. What's the backlog total for just parks, for public buildings and facilities?
I don't have that number. I'll check with Mike Penwell real quick.
And the second question is, do we have a backlog number for parks? This is, and a gap analysis for parks?
The deferred maintenance or deferred renovation gap of $23 million is the closest apples-to-apples comparison for parks that we have. The annual O&M gap for parks is pushing $2 million a year.
And the total deferred maintenance on facilities is about $33 million.
So we got we've got $250 million worth of deferred maintenance that we've dug ourselves a hole. Okay. And are there any others? Yeah. Does that cover it? Roads, parks, facilities?
Not probably as far as the general fund is concerned, and not to that magnitude, no.
Yeah. So the only way to overcome all of these giant multi-million-dollar gaps is to do some kind of bond like we did with roads, the road bond levy, which actually contributes about $7 or so million a year, and that gap what was the height of that road backlog? It was like almost $200 million, right? And we've cut that down by actually paying for it and moving forward with those. So are there other strategies other than what we did with the road fund to try to get at doing these backlogs? I mean, obviously, we're not going to take more general fund and throw it at these backlogs.
No, I think there are, and it would be a broader policy discussion for all of you, but I think the range of options include something like you mentioned, a bond measure to deal with the total backlog up to disposing of those assets to the extent we can't take care of them, and adopt a different strategy for service delivery. For example, don't own public buildings and occupy leased space. And that's not a suggestion, only one other end of the spectrum.
That was my suggestion for City Hall, but that's not going anywhere. Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I put myself into the queue. So I had a similar question, is how do you evaluate, I assume there's a tipping point for these assets where at some point you've degraded the asset and there's so much backlog of maintenance that it would actually be potentially more effective or efficient to replace the asset?
Sure, good question. And when it comes to roads, for example, if I put that curve back up there and we get down to the point where you have to spend $4 to $5 on it, that effectively is a tipping point that it doesn't really matter too much when you schedule that work, because it's going to be about the same cost thereafter. So the real tipping point that we try to use with all of the capital preservation strategy is to get to that $1 investment point and try to do the preservation when the money does the most good and when it will stretch the farthest.
Okay, thanks. I guess I was trying to think about things like where we have, if our pools are at the point where they are, the deferred maintenance is great, and there's clearly a community desire for those services, and at what point can there be some kind of bond or some kind of levy that says, hey, people, if we really want pools, we're going to go forward with something that funds pools.
Like for roads.
Right, the way that we do for roads. So I think that's just something that's interesting to explore. And then my final comment is just that, to me, this is really helpful to hear. Thank you for bringing this. And this is one of the policy challenges that we have is how do you continue to let maintenance be deferred? Obviously, these are more additional unintended consequences, right? Where if we continue to defer maintenance, eventually we will pay more. And so, yeah, we have to figure out how do we value preserving what we have and the services that those buildings and those assets provide compared to the other services that we know the community values. I think it's an important conversation. So, yeah, thank you for coming to present. Yeah, Mayor Piercy.
I was going to say, one of the other things to think about is we always refer to, we did earlier, but we refer to a policy that we've made. We have a policy now that says we want X amount of parks in our city and neighborhood parks in proximity. We've got a policy that drives that we're always working on trying to do. And unless we change that policy, we will keep charging in that direction. So we're now at a place where we have a very hard time maintaining what we are not maintaining what we have. And yet we know that the public would be very unhappy if we changed that policy, especially those that don't feel they're well enough served yet. So that's kind of a challenge. And then the third piece to that, to me, is when you ask the public what they like most about the city, parks arrives at one of the top things. So that's a very important asset to the public in the livability of the community. And if you ask why people choose to work and live here, you'll get a similar kind of answer. So you have to sort of put that into the pot of what choices you make and how you might change the current policy. So it's just an interesting thing to try to put all those pieces together and really assess, do we want to keep going in the direction we're going, or do we have to alter it because we can't manage it, or do we go out and ask people if they want to pay some more? Yeah.
We only have a couple minutes left. Anyone have a final comment? Or do we? Okay, Councilor Zelenka. Wait, your second round. Anybody else have a first round comment? No? Okay.
We've heard a lot about streamlining and making us more efficient, and completely supportive of that, and have been supportive of it all along. And a big chunk of what we did during the last 3 years has been for the city manager to go through the city budget and to streamline and to make more efficient. And one of the issues that I think we have is that nobody knows that. We haven't told that story. When we were talking about this last year, we would say we made $20 million, $24 million worth of cuts, and everybody said, where, what are you talking about? I never saw any of that. So my question is, how does that get clarified for people? Is it going to be part of the presentation that is at these budget committee meetings that are around at the high schools? And how do we talk about that more?
Did you want
No, you ahead.
Some of that will get articulated at the presentations over the next couple of weeks.
So we took this, to be more specific, we took the suggestion that we heard here about a video and actually created a video where John excuse me, John speaks a little bit about that background of kind of that walk down memory lane, an abbreviated version that he did for all of us at our work session. How did we get here? What have we cut? Those kinds of things. And then we also talk a little bit about the vision for the city, big picture, how we frame the budget in terms of going towards some goals and some vision. And then we make sure that we ask the community for their engagement and feedback, and that's an important part of the process. So that will be part of the community meetings, and hopefully do a little bit of that for people. So thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Kurt, for starting us an interesting conversation. We are adjourned.
Capital preservation.